Hi, I'm Lauren Keim with the Goodman Center for Real Estate Studies here at Lehigh University, one of the country's premier real estate programs. Each year, the Goodman Center puts on a competition of teams of real estate students to completely evaluate commercial properties or projects to determine the value at their highest and best use. In prior competitions, the teams have evaluated projects from the Sands Casino to the Promenade Shops to the New York Times building and everything in between. Now, this year will be a little different. Teams will be evaluating warehouses and distribution centers. So why would we be doing distribution centers when there's so many exciting properties and projects to study? I think you'll find the answer and this year's projects very interesting because a potentially massive shift in the movement of goods across the country may result in huge opportunities for developers of warehouse and distribution facilities in the right locations. I hope you enjoy the program.
Transportation and the paths of product distribution are poised to change significantly over the next decade, creating potential opportunity for investors, developers, and realtors. Distribution centers are the foundation of the global supply network as they allow a single location to stock a vast number of products. Some organizations operate both retail distribution and direct-to-customer out of a single facility, sharing space, equipment, labor resources, and inventory. A typical retail distribution network operates with centers set up throughout a commercial market, with each center serving a number of stores. Suppliers ship truckloads of products to the distribution center, which stores the product until needed by the retail location and then ships the proper quantity. Distribution centers range in size from less than 50,000 square feet to the largest approaching 3 million square feet. Since the 1980s, the single largest driver of cost in distribution space has not been personnel, real estate, or rent, but rather has been the carrying cost to carry finished goods. Today, there are $1.4 trillion tied up in finished goods inventory in the United States. Based on a weighted cost of capital of 10, the average daily cost of carrying finished goods is approximately $100 million a day. U.S. customers pay the cost of carrying those finished goods and the prices we pay for products. Since the 1980s, companies have been asking, how do we reduce costs by reducing inventory? The answer was, just-in-time manufacturing. Traditional manufacturing focuses on forecasting the demand for their products into the future and later attempting to smooth out production to meet the demand. In many instances, manufacturers try to maximize production while attempting to reduce costs. Unfortunately, this approach has many drawbacks, including large inventories, long production lines, production obsolescence, inability to meet set schedules, and high costs. Just-in-time manufacturing is a production method and inventory control system in which companies purchase materials and produce units only as needed to meet the actual customer's demand. The reduction of inventories leads to substantial reductions in ordering and holding costs. These funds that in the past were tied up in the inventories can then be used elsewhere to benefit the company. Additionally, the areas in the warehouses that previously were used to store the inventories can now be used for other more productive uses. Furthermore, the defect rates are reduced, thus resulting in less waste and greater consumer satisfaction. It is estimated that without just-in-time manufacturing processes being put in place over the past 2 decades, the $1.4 trillion in finished goods stored in the United States would be closer to $1.8 trillion. That translates into a savings of $400 billion in distribution, which means products, from sneakers to cars, cost less and consumers can put that money to work in other ways. The price of nearly everything has gone down because we've been able to reduce the amount of inventory we're carrying. Over the past decade, however, the key driver of cost for distribution has shifted. Fuel has become the most expensive part of the supply chain. Oil has become more expensive than carrying inventory. 9% of every dollar we spend on consumer goods goes to logistics. Less than 5% of the logistics expense goes to labor. Fuel and transportation now cost nearly twice as much as inventory, so companies are rethinking how to drive their expense down. A large percentage of the goods consumed by Americans are manufactured overseas. Goods from around the world are transported to the United States through several major ports along both the east and west coasts. One of the busiest and most spectacular seaports in the world is anchored on the southern tip of Los Angeles. It consists of 7,500 acres of land and water. the port is the busiest port in the United States by container volume. Its top trading partner in 2010 was China, totaling $120.7 billion, followed by Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, and Thailand, totaling $63.3 billion. It's America's premier port, bustling 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, bringing in goods that we want and international trade that we need. Approximately 42% of the nation's containerized cargo flows through Los Angeles. For example, raw cotton that is grown in Central California might be shipped overseas to become t-shirts made in China and transported back into Los Angeles to be sold around the nation. Goods come to the West Coast because that has been the most efficient and cost-effective route of distribution. China is the United States' largest supplier of goods imports, and trade within China is growing at nearly 25% per year. For example, in 1990, Xinjiang was a Chinese fishing village. Today, only 2 decades later, Xinjiang is one of the world's 3 largest ports. Products are shipped from China, Australia, Japan, and Asian nations to the West Coast because it's the most direct path. Since the highest concentrations of the U.S. population are on the East Coast, products are brought across the country by rail and truck. The majority of products shipped from Asia to the United States are sent in large metal containers, which can be easily loaded from ships onto trains or trucks. These containers are measured in TEUs, which are a standard metric unit which stands for 1 20-foot equivalent unit. Since the dimensions of the containers are industry standards, all cargo ships and freight carriers can accommodate them. They are very advantageous to use because they can be easily stacked, stored, and can carry a multitude of products. Some containers, called reefers, can even be refrigerated to store perishable items. Another main advantage of containers is that they can be taken off cargo ships and loaded onto trains and other transportation vehicles easily. Despite the fact that only 10% of the U.S. population lives within a one-day truck drive of Los Angeles, approximately 42% of all U.S. imports come through the LA port. The majority of the population lives east of the Mississippi or along a strip of the West Coast. Goods are loaded from ships onto the trains that bring the products east to the logistics centers, from which they are distributed to their final destinations on the East Coast by truck. However, recently the largest component of distribution cost has become the cost of fuel, which is changing the dynamic of distribution. In order to reduce the cost of fuel for products, companies need to reduce the distance traveled by truck. Bigger vessels, such as ships, cost less to move large quantities of goods. The cost of truck fuel can be kept to a minimum by keeping the inventory on a ship or a train as long as possible. Understanding that, Warren Buffett has become owner of the Burlington Santa Fe Railroad, and Bill Gates has become the largest single shareholder in the Canadian National Railroad. The dynamic that will dramatically shift distribution is the widening of the Panama Canal. Currently, the Panama Canal can only support container ships with lengths no longer than 1,050 feet and width of only 110 feet. Many of the great ships bringing goods from Asia are too large for the Panama Canal, meaning they must dock on the West Coast. The new locks being built in Panama will accommodate ships that are 1,400 feet long and 180 feet wide. While the current canal only allows ships that can hold 5,000 TEUs of freight through the locks, the expansion will allow ships carrying more than double the loads, up to 12,000 TEUs. The new locks will be complete in 2014. When the expanded Panama Canal is completed, it is predicted that manufacturers and distributors will save significantly on fuel costs by keeping the products on the ships, bringing them through the Panama Canal, and offload their containers on the East Coast, closer to the population centers of the United States. While the Port of Los Angeles may lose hundreds of thousands of jobs, East Coast ports are poised to receive much larger shipments from China, Australia, and Asian countries. Some ports that are expected to grow include Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, Norfolk, Virginia, and ports in Georgia and Florida. These goods will be loaded onto train and sent to distribution centers and warehouses that reduce the cost of distribution by truck to the East Coast. A recent study indicates that areas considered to be likely recipients of significant growth by becoming distribution hubs include Central Georgia, Memphis, Columbus, Ohio, New Jersey, and the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. This dramatic shift in centers of distribution for the national supply chain will create opportunities for companies, investors, developers, and their realtors.